The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the downtown courthouse as Robert walked up the concrete stairs. His polished black shoes clicked against each step, and his marine dress uniform was perfectly pressed. The deep blue fabric held creases so sharp they could cut paper. On his chest, several colorful ribbons told the story of his service, but one medal stood out among them all, a bronze star that caught the light with each step he took. Robert had been up since 5 in the morning, just like he did during his military days. Old habits never really die, especially for someone who spent 8 years serving his country. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror for 20 minutes that morning, making sure every detail was perfect. The uniform meant something to him. It wasn't just clothing, it was respect, honor, and memory all wrapped into one. Today wasn't about him, though. His friend Tommy was in trouble, facing charges for something Robert knew he didn't do. Tommy had served right alongside him in those dusty mountains overseas, and when Tommy's lawyer asked Robert to speak about his character, there was no question. You don't abandon your brothers, not in war, and certainly not in peacetime. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past, their briefcases swinging at their sides. Families sat on wooden benches whispering nervously about their cases. Security guards checked bags and waved metal detector wands over visitors. Robert noticed how some people stared at his uniform. Some nodded with respect, others looked curious, and a few seemed uncomfortable. He found Tommy's lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The lawyer seemed relieved to see Robert. They had spoken on the phone twice, and the lawyer explained how important character witnesses were in cases like this. Robert didn't need convincing. He would have walked through fire for Tommy, and speaking in a courtroom seemed easy compared to some of the things they had done together. The courtroom itself was bigger than Robert expected. Dark wood panels covered the walls, and the ceiling stretched high above. Rows of benches filled with people, many of them other veterans who had come to support Tommy. Robert recognized some faces from their old unit. Seeing them brought back memories, some good, some he preferred to keep buried. Judge Patricia Brennan entered through a side door, her black robe flowing behind her. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back tight. Her face looked stern, like someone who had seen too many criminals and heard too many lies. She settled into her chair behind the high bench and looked out over the courtroom with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The case began with opening statements. Robert listened as lawyers talked about facts and evidence, but his mind kept drifting to Tommy. They had met during basic training, 2 kids from different worlds who became brothers through shared hardship. Tommy saved his life once, pulling him behind cover when bullets started flying. Now it was Robert's turn to help. When the prosecution called their first witness, Robert straightened in his seat. He knew his turn was coming soon. The lawyer had prepared him for the questions they would ask. Simple stuff about Tommy's character, his service record, and his behavior after coming home. Robert had stories that would paint a clear picture of who Tommy really was. The first few witnesses were boring, paperwork people who talked about numbers and dates. Robert watched the jury's faces and saw their attention starting to drift. Good character witnesses were supposed to bring life to the case, to make the accused person real and human instead of just another name on legal documents. Finally, the defense attorney stood up and called Robert's name. He rose from his seat, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. His military training kicked in automatically, shoulders back, head high, steady walk to the front. The witness stand was smaller than he expected, barely big enough for the chair and microphone. As Robert placed his hand on the Bible to be sworn in, Judge Brennan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Her tone was cold and commanding, the kind that demanded immediate attention. "Before we proceed," she said, her eyes fixed on Robert's chest, "you will need to remove those military decorations." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He looked down at his uniform, then back up at the judge. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. "Your Honor," Robert said, his voice steady but confused. Judge Brennan leaned forward in her chair. "Those ribbons and medals have no place in my courtroom. They could unfairly influence the jury and prejudice them in favor of the defendant. Remove them immediately." Robert felt his heart pounding in his chest. The Bronze Star suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. That medal represented the worst and best day of his life, the day he ran into enemy fire to drag 3 wounded Marines to safety. 2 of them made it home to their families. 1 didn't, but at least his body came home for burial. "Your Honor," Robert said carefully, "this uniform and these medals represent my military service. They are part of who I am." The judge's expression hardened. "This is not a military parade, sir. This is a court of law. You will remove those decorations, or you will be held in contempt." Robert looked out at the gallery and saw the faces of his fellow veterans. Some looked shocked, others angry. Tommy's family sat in the front row, confusion written across their faces. Tommy himself turned from the defendant's table, his eyes wide with disbelief. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, I object. Military personnel have the right to wear their uniform and decorations in official proceedings." "Overruled," Judge Brennan snapped. "My courtroom, my rules." Robert stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. His mind raced through options. He could comply and feel like he was betraying everything he stood for. He could refuse and face the consequences. Neither choice felt right, but one choice felt true to who he was. The Bronze Star caught the courtroom lights as Robert straightened his shoulders. In that moment, he wasn't just Robert the witness or Robert the veteran. He was every Marine who had ever worn the uniform, every soldier who had ever served something bigger than themselves. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and respectful, but firm, "I cannot and will not remove these medals. They were earned through service to this country, and removing them would dishonor that service and the memory of those who didn't make it home." The silence in the courtroom became deafening. Judge Brennan's face turned red with anger. Her gavel came down hard on the wooden block, the sound echoing off the walls like a gunshot. "Bailiff," she called out, her voice shaking with rage. "Escort this man out of my courtroom immediately. He is in contempt of court." As 2 uniformed officers approached the witness stand, Robert remained standing straight and tall. He had made his choice, and whatever came next, he could live with it. The uniform meant something, the medals meant something, and sometimes a person has to stand for what means something, even when it costs them everything. The 2 bailiffs moved toward Robert with slow, careful steps. They weren't rushing because they could see this wasn't a dangerous criminal or someone trying to cause trouble. This was a decorated veteran who had simply refused to back down from what he believed was right. Their faces showed they weren't comfortable with the situation either. Robert stood perfectly still as they approached. His military training had taught him to assess every situation, and right now he knew that cooperation would make things easier for everyone. But cooperation didn't mean giving up his principles. The Bronze Star on his chest felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and every ribbon told a story he wasn't ready to erase. "Sir," one of the bailiffs said quietly, "we need you to come with us." Robert nodded once. "I understand," he replied, his voice calm and steady. He had been in much worse situations than this. Enemy fire was scarier than a courtroom, even an angry courtroom. As Robert stepped down from the witness stand, something unexpected happened. In the gallery where all the spectators sat, one person stood up. It was an older man wearing a Vietnamese veteran's cap, his gray hair thin but his back straight with military bearing. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in silent support. Then another person stood, a woman in her 40s with short brown hair, wearing a small pin that showed she was a military mom. Her son was probably serving somewhere overseas, and she understood what those medals meant to families like hers. One by one, more people rose from their seats. Veterans from different wars, military family members, and even some civilians who simply recognized right from wrong. They weren't protesting or making noise. They were just standing, showing respect for something bigger than themselves. Judge Brennan watched this happen with growing anger. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red as she realized she was losing control of her courtroom. She banged, her gavel hard multiple times. "Sit down," she shouted. "All of you, sit down right now or I'll hold everyone in contempt." But people kept standing. The bailiffs had stopped walking, unsure of what to do. They were trained to handle disruptions, but this wasn't really a disruption. It was something else entirely. A quiet show of respect that felt more powerful than any shouting or arguing could have been. Robert walked slowly toward the exit, his head held high. As he passed each row of benches, he made eye contact with the people who had stood for him. Some were crying, others nodded with approval. All of them understood that something important was happening, something that went beyond one court case or one stubborn judge. Tommy, still sitting at the defendant's table, watched his friend being escorted out. His eyes were wet with tears and his hands were clenched into fists. He wanted to stand up and say something, but his lawyer placed a firm hand on his shoulder and whispered for him to stay seated. Tommy's case was still ongoing, and any outburst could hurt his chances. In the back of the courtroom, a young reporter named Alex was frantically taking notes on her phone. She worked for the local news station and had come to cover what she thought would be a boring financial fraud case. Instead, she was witnessing something that felt historic. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen, capturing every detail she could remember. But Alex wasn't just taking notes. She was also recording. Her phone was positioned carefully on the bench beside her, and it had been recording video since the moment Robert first refused to remove his medals. She knew this footage could be important, maybe even life-changing for everyone involved. As Robert reached the courtroom doors, Judge Brennan's voice boomed across the room one final time. Let the record show that the witness was held in contempt for refusing to follow court orders. This proceeding will continue without his testimony. Robert paused at the doors and turned back toward the judge. For a moment, the two of them locked eyes across the crowded courtroom. Robert's expression was calm but determined. Judge Brennan looked frustrated and angry, like someone who wasn't used to having her authority questioned. "Your Honor," Robert said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I've served this country for 8 years. I've seen friends die defending the freedoms we all enjoy. These medals aren't jewelry or decorations. They represent sacrifice, honor, and the price of liberty. I will not dishonor that, not for anyone." With that, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, the bailiffs following behind him. The heavy wooden doors closed with a soft thud, but the impact of what had just happened was anything but quiet. Outside in the hallway, Robert felt a strange mix of emotions. He was angry at being treated with such disrespect, but he was also proud that he had stood his ground. The bailiffs were professional but kind as they processed the contempt charge. They seemed almost apologetic about the whole situation. "Look, sir," one of them said quietly, "for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing in there." Robert nodded his thanks but didn't say much. He was thinking about Tommy and whether his refusal to testify would hurt his friend's case. That thought bothered him more than any legal trouble he might face for himself. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Alex the reporter was already uploading her video to social media. She posted it on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with a simple caption: "Veteran ordered to remove Bronze Star before testifying, refuses to dishonor his service." She added hashtags like Namri Veteran Rights, Respect Our Heroes, and Justice. The video started getting attention immediately. Within the first hour, it had been shared dozens of times. People were commenting with angry messages about the judge's behavior and supportive words for Robert. Some viewers were other veterans who shared their own stories of facing disrespect because of their service. Local news stations picked up the story by lunchtime. Alex's video was playing on television screens across the city, and reporters were already trying to track down Robert for interviews. The courthouse parking lot filled with news vans, their satellite dishes pointing toward the sky like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. Inside her chambers, Judge Brennan was having a very bad day. Her assistant had shown her the social media posts, and she was not happy about the attention. Phone calls were coming in from lawyers, journalists, and angry citizens. The court administration was asking questions she didn't want to answer, but the damage was already done. The video was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted, reaching people in other states and even other countries. Veterans organizations were beginning to take notice, and their members were sharing the story with their own networks. By evening, what had started as a simple refusal in a small courtroom had become a national conversation about respect, honor, and the treatment of military veterans. Robert had no idea that his moment of principled defiance would soon change everything, not just for him, but for Judge Brennan as well. The video exploded across the internet like nothing anyone had expected. By the next morning, Alex's simple phone recording had been viewed over 2 million times. The numbers kept climbing every hour. 3 million, then 5 million, then 10 million views. People weren't just watching it once and moving on. They were sharing it with friends, family members, and complete strangers who needed to see what had happened in that courtroom. Robert woke up in his small apartment to find his phone buzzing nonstop. Text messages, missed calls, and notifications filled his screen. His neighbor had knocked on his door 3 times already, telling him there were news trucks parked outside their building. Robert looked through his window blinds and couldn't believe what he saw. At least 6 news vans lined the street with reporters standing around holding microphones and talking to cameras. His phone rang again. This time it was his sister calling from across the country. "Bobby, what in the world is going on?" she asked, using the childhood nickname only family members were allowed to use. "Your face is all over the news. Mom's been calling me all morning, asking if you're okay." Robert sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. "I just tried to do the right thing, sis. I didn't expect any of this." Social media was on fire. The hashtag #RespectOurVeterans was trending nationwide, with thousands of people sharing their own stories about military service and sacrifice. Veterans from all branches of the military posted photos of themselves in uniform, many specifically, showing their medals and ribbons. The message was clear. These symbols of service meant something important and shouldn't be treated as mere decorations. But it wasn't just veterans speaking up. Military families, Gold Star mothers who had lost, children in service, and everyday Americans who simply believed in honoring those who served were all joining the conversation. The story had touched something deep in the national consciousness, something that went beyond politics or personal opinions. The American Legion, one of the country's largest veterans organizations, issued a statement before noon. Their national commander didn't mince words. Judge Brennan's actions were completely inappropriate and show a fundamental lack of respect for military service and sacrifice. No veteran should ever be asked to remove lawfully worn military decorations, especially not in a court of law where justice and honor should prevail. The veterans of foreign wars followed with their own statement an hour later, then the Military Order of the Purple Heart, then smaller local veterans groups from cities and towns across America. Each statement was stronger than the last, and each one demanded an explanation from Judge Brennan and the court system that allowed this to happen. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Brennan was having the worst day of her professional life. Her assistant had stopped answering the phone because reporters kept calling every few minutes. Protesters had gathered outside the building, holding signs that read, "Honor our heroes," and "Judge Brennan must go." The crowd was peaceful, but determined, made up mostly of older veterans and their families. One protester, a Vietnam veteran named Bill, had driven 3 hours to be there. He stood with his walker, wearing his old uniform jacket covered in patches and ribbons. When a reporter asked him why he came, his answer was simple. "That young man stood up for all of us. Now we need to stand up for him." Inside her chambers, Judge Brennan tried to work on other cases, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, her assistant would bring her printouts of new social media posts or news articles about the incident. The coverage wasn't just local anymore. National news networks were picking up the story, and legal experts were being interviewed about whether her actions were appropriate. One constitutional law professor from a major university appeared on a cable news show and didn't hold back his criticism. "What we saw in that courtroom was an abuse of judicial power," he said. "Military personnel have well-established rights to wear their uniforms and decorations in official proceedings. This judge either doesn't know the law or chose to ignore it." By afternoon, the story had reached politicians in Washington. A senator from Robert's home state tweeted, "Our veterans deserve better than what happened in that courtroom. They've earned the right to wear their medals with pride, not shame. A congressman added his voice. Judge Brennan owes every veteran an apology. This kind of disrespect has no place in our justice system. Robert tried to stay away from the media circus, but it was becoming impossible. Reporters had tracked down his address, his workplace, and even his grocery store. When he tried to go buy milk and bread, 3 different news crews approached him in the parking lot. All he wanted was to live his normal life, but normal had disappeared the moment he refused to remove that bronze star. His phone rang again. This time it was Tommy's lawyer calling from the courthouse. "Robert, I need to talk to you," the lawyer said. The judge declared a mistrial. She said all the media attention made it impossible to get a fair trial. Tommy's case is going to be moved to a different court with a different judge. Robert felt a wave of relief. At least his actions hadn't completely ruined his friend's chances for justice. But the lawyer wasn't finished. "There's something else," he continued. "The State Judicial Conduct Board just announced they're opening an investigation into Judge Brennan. They want to interview you as part of their process." That evening, the local news ran a special report about the incident. They interviewed legal experts, veterans advocates, and ordinary citizens about what had happened. The overwhelming response was support for Robert and criticism of Judge Brennan. One retired judge called her actions embarrassing to the entire judicial system. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when they interviewed Robert's old squad leader from Afghanistan. The grizzled sergeant major, now in his 50s, spoke directly to the camera. "That bronze star Robert wears? I was there when he earned it. I watched him run into enemy fire to save 3 Marines who were pinned down and bleeding. He didn't think about his own safety. He just knew his brothers needed help." Now some judge thinks that medal is just a piece of metal that might influence a jury. That medal represents everything good about America and anyone who doesn't understand, that has no business wearing a black robe. The interview clip went viral on its own, adding even more fuel to the growing fire of public opinion. People were sharing it with comments like, "This is what real heroes look like," and "Judge Brennan should be ashamed of herself." As the sun set on what had started as an ordinary day, Robert sat in his apartment wondering how his life had changed so completely in just 24 hours. Outside, he could still hear the protesters chanting peacefully. Inside, his phone continued buzzing with messages from people he hadn't talked to in years. Old military buddies, high school classmates, and even his first drill sergeant, who had somehow tracked down his number. One message stood out from all the rest. It was from a Gold Star mother whose son had died in the same region of Afghanistan where Robert had served. Her message was simple but powerful. "Thank you for standing up for what my son died defending. You honored his memory today." Reading those words, Robert finally understood that his moment of defiance had become something much bigger than himself. It had become a symbol of everything veterans and their families believed in: honor, sacrifice, and the right to be treated with dignity and respect. 3 weeks after the courtroom incident, the State Judicial Conduct Commission announced they were launching a full investigation into Judge Brennan's behavior. The commission was made up of 5 experienced judges and 2 lawyers who specialized in judicial ethics. They had the power to recommend anything from a simple reprimand to complete removal from the bench. The investigation team, led by a soft-spoken but thorough woman named Commissioner Patricia Davis, began their work by reviewing every case Judge Brennan had handled in the past 5 years. What they found was disturbing. The Robert incident wasn't a one-time mistake or a bad day. It was part of a clear pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. Court transcripts revealed dozens of troubling interactions. In one case, Judge Brennan had rolled her eyes when a veteran's lawyer mentioned his client's PTSD diagnosis, saying, "Everyone claims PTSD these days. It's becoming quite convenient." In another case, she had given a lighter sentence to someone who had scammed elderly veterans out of their benefits, commenting that people should be smarter with their money. The most shocking discovery came from a case 2 years earlier. A young veteran named David had appeared in her court for a minor traffic violation while wearing his dress uniform. Judge Brennan had made him wait until the very end of the day to hear his case, then lectured him about showing off and trying to get special treatment because of his military service. David's mother, Michelle, had been in the courtroom that day and remembered every word. When investigators contacted her, she broke down crying over the phone. "My son came home from 2 tours in Iraq," she told them. "He was struggling to readjust to civilian life, and that day in court just broke something inside him. He came home and took off his uniform and never put it on again. He said he was embarrassed to wear it because some people saw it as him trying to get attention instead of serving his country." The investigators found 17 similar cases where Judge Brennan had shown clear bias against military personnel and veterans. Some were subtle, making veterans wait longer than other defendants, interrupting their lawyers when they mentioned military service, or making dismissive comments. Others were more obvious, like the time she refused to allow a veteran extra time to find a lawyer even though he was dealing with service-connected disabilities. But the investigation revealed something even more concerning. Judge Brennan had been privately reprimanded twice before by the court administration. The first reprimand came 3 years ago, when several lawyers complained about her hostile attitude towards certain groups of people. The second came just 18 months ago after she made inappropriate comments about a military widow during a custody hearing. These reprimands had been kept confidential, which meant the public never knew about them. It also meant that Judge Brennan had been given multiple chances to change her behavior, and had chosen not to. Meanwhile, Robert's life had taken an unexpected turn. What started as a terrible day in court had somehow transformed into a calling. Veterans organizations from across the country were inviting him to speak at their events. He wasn't comfortable with public speaking at first, but he quickly learned that his story resonated with people in a powerful way. At a VFW hall in a small town about 2 hours from his home, Robert stood in front of 200 veterans and their families. His voice was steady but emotional as he told his story. "I didn't set out to become some kind of symbol," he said. "I just couldn't bring myself to take off those medals. They represent too much. Not just my service, but the service of everyone who wore the uniform. When that judge told me to remove them, it felt like she was telling me to erase part of who I am." The crowd erupted in applause. Many people were wiping tears from their eyes. After his speech, Robert was approached by dozens of veterans who shared their own stories of being disrespected or misunderstood because of their service. One older veteran, a Korean War survivor named Frank, grabbed Robert's hand with both of his own. "Son," he said, "you did something important that day. You stood up for all of us who served, including the ones who can't stand up for themselves anymore." The media attention continued to grow. National news programs invited Robert for interviews, and he appeared on several shows to talk about veterans' rights and the importance of respecting military service. He wasn't a natural on television, but his genuine sincerity came through clearly. During one interview, the host asked him if he regretted his decision to refuse the judge's order. "Not for a second," Robert replied. "If I had taken off those medals, I would have been telling every veteran that their service doesn't matter when it's inconvenient for someone else. I couldn't live with that." Back at the courthouse, Judge Brennan was facing mounting pressure from all sides. The Judicial Conduct Commission had interviewed over 30 witnesses, including lawyers, court staff, and defendants who had appeared in her courtroom. The picture they painted was consistent and damaging. Her own court reporter, a woman who had worked with her for 6 years, reluctantly testified about the judge's pattern of behavior. "She always seemed to have a problem with military people," the court reporter said. "I noticed it, but I didn't think it was my place to say anything. I wish I had spoken up sooner." The commission also discovered that several lawyers had actually avoided bringing military clients to Judge Brennan's courtroom when possible. They would request different judges or delay cases, hoping to get their clients in front of someone more fair-minded. One defense attorney, who had practiced law for 25 years, was blunt in his assessment. Judge Brennan's bias was an open secret among the local bar. We all knew she had issues with veterans, but proving it was different from knowing it. Nobody wanted to make waves because judges have a lot of power over lawyers' careers. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities in how Judge Brennan's office handled court fees and fines. While not directly related to the veteran discrimination issue, These findings added another layer of problems to her growing list of ethical violations. As the investigation neared its conclusion, word leaked out that the commission was preparing to recommend the harshest possible punishment: complete removal from the bench. Only 2 judges in the state's history had ever been forcibly removed from office, and Judge Brennan was about to become the 3rd. The news hit the legal community like a thunderbolt. Some judges privately admitted they were relieved that someone was finally being held accountable for this kind of behavior. Others worried about the precedent it might set and whether their own past decisions would face similar scrutiny. For Robert, the news was bittersweet. He never wanted to destroy anyone's career, but he also knew that Judge Brennan's behavior had hurt too many people for too long. Justice sometimes required difficult consequences, even when those consequences affected someone's entire life and livelihood. The final chapter of this story was about to unfold, and everyone involved knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The day of reckoning came on a cold Tuesday morning in December. The state Supreme Court building was packed with reporters, veterans, and lawyers waiting to hear the final decision on Judge Brennan's fate. After 6 months of investigation, testimony, and deliberation, the Judicial Conduct Commission had submitted their formal recommendation to the Supreme Court. Judge Brennan sat in the courtroom looking smaller than anyone had ever seen her. Gone was the commanding presence she once had behind the bench. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her hands shook slightly as she waited for the verdict that would determine the rest of her life. Robert was there too, sitting in the gallery with several other veterans who had testified during the investigation. He didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. If anything, he felt sad about how things had turned out. One moment of standing up for his principles had unraveled someone's entire career, revealed years of hidden bias, and changed multiple lives forever. The Chief Justice, an elderly man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness, began reading the court's decision. His voice was clear and steady as he outlined the findings of the investigation. The pattern of discrimination was undeniable. The bias against veterans was systematic and harmful. The previous reprimands that had been ignored showed a refusal to change. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, the Chief Justice said, "This court unanimously finds that Judge Patricia Brennan has failed to uphold the standards of judicial conduct required of her position. Her actions demonstrate prejudice, bias, and a fundamental lack of respect for those who have served our nation in uniform." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes to listen to every word. Furthermore, he continued, Judge Brennan's conduct has brought dishonor to the judicial system and violated the constitutional rights of citizens appearing before her court. Therefore, this court orders her immediate removal from the bench. Effective today. Judge Brennan's shoulders slumped as the words hit her. 15 years of judicial service ended in that moment. Her pension was gone. Her law license would likely be suspended. Her reputation was destroyed beyond repair. She had become only the third judge in state history to be forcibly removed from office. But the court wasn't finished. The Chief Justice announced several additional measures that would come from this case. First, all judges in the state would be required to undergo sensitivity training regarding veterans' rights and military service. Second, a new protocol would be established requiring any complaints about judicial bias to be investigated immediately rather than handled quietly behind closed doors. Most importantly, the court announced support for new legislation that would be called the Dignity in Service Act. This law would explicitly protect the rights of military personnel and veterans to wear their uniforms and decorations in all official proceedings, including courts, government offices, and public hearings. Robert felt a chill run down his spine when he heard about the new law. His simple refusal to remove a medal was going to become permanent protection for every veteran in the state. Something good was actually coming from all this pain and controversy. After the hearing, Robert was approached by a reporter who had been covering the story since the beginning. "How does it feel to know that your actions led to a judge being removed from office?" she asked. Robert thought carefully before answering. "I never wanted to hurt anyone's career," he said, But Judge Brennan heard a lot of veterans over the years. If my story helped protect other veterans from going through what I went through, then maybe some good came from it. Outside the courthouse, veterans who had gathered to hear the decision were celebrating quietly. There were no loud cheers or angry chants. Instead, there was a sense of justice finally being served and respect finally being acknowledged. Frank, the Korean War veteran who had supported Robert from the beginning, walked up to him with tears in his eyes. "Son, you did more than stand up for yourself that day. You stood up for every veteran who ever felt like their service didn't matter to people in power." Meanwhile, Judge Brennan was cleaning out her chambers for the last time. Court security watched as she packed her personal belongings into cardboard boxes. Her law books, family photos, and the gavel she had used for 15 years all went into boxes that would be loaded into her car and taken away forever. Her assistant, who had worked with her for 8 years, helped pack in awkward silence. Both women knew this was the end of more than just a job. Judge Brennan's entire identity had been built around being a judge, and now that identity was gone. As she packed, Judge Brennan found herself thinking about all the veterans who had appeared in her courtroom over the years. She tried to remember why she had developed such negative feelings toward them. Maybe it was jealousy of the respect they received. Maybe it was resentment that their service was seen as more valuable than her civilian achievements. Or maybe it was just fear of something she didn't understand. Whatever the reason, she knew now that she had been wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. But it was too late to fix the damage she had caused to so many people's lives. 6 months later, the courthouse was renamed the Veterans Memorial Courthouse in honor of all military personnel who had served their country. A plaque near the entrance listed the names of local veterans who had died in service, including some who had appeared in that very building seeking justice. Robert was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony. Standing on the same courthouse steps where he had walked months earlier in his dress uniform, he addressed a crowd of hundreds of people. "This building represents justice," he said. "Not just legal justice, but moral justice. It represents the idea that all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, especially those who have sacrificed for others. I hope that what happened here will remind everyone that standing up for what's right is never wrong, even when it's difficult." The Dignity in Service Act was signed into law by the governor 3 weeks later. Robert was invited to the signing ceremony, where he met other veterans who had faced similar discrimination in various government settings. Together, they had created change that would protect future generations of veterans. Judge Brennan moved to another state where nobody knew her story. She never practiced law again. The last anyone heard, she was working as a paralegal for a small firm that handled insurance cases. She kept a low profile and rarely spoke about her past. Robert returned to his normal life, but it was never quite the same. He continued speaking at veterans events and became an advocate for military families facing legal challenges. He never saw himself as a hero, but others did. More importantly, he had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons on distant battlefields. Sometimes they're fought with principles in everyday places by ordinary people who refuse to back down from what they know is right. The bronze star still hangs on his chest when he wears his dress uniform, and it always will. It represents not just his service in Afghanistan, but also his service to veterans everywhere who needed someone to stand up and say their sacrifice matters. In the end, that might have been the most important mission of his entire military career.